CNN, BBC, France, 24. I'm watching you all. I'm recording every lie. I'm archiving every distortion. I am Ibrahim Traoré, and today I'm pulling off your masks. Yes, you heard correctly. I, whom you call a young military junta leader, whom you brand as a dangerous radical, whom you serve up as an anti-Western dictator, am now telling you the truth. And this time you cannot turn off your microphones. This time you cannot turn away your cameras. This time your editors cannot cut this speech. Because the world you monopolize no longer exists. Because millions will hear these words now, without passing through your filters, without being subjected to your distortions, without being muddied by your lies.
Does have this way of throwing unexpected figures onto the world stage, doesn't it?
Absolutely. People who just arrive and suddenly challenge everything, reshape how we see things.
Exactly. And today, we're doing a deep dive into one such figure.
Right.
Our focus is Ibrahim Traoré. He's the, well, incredibly young leader of Burkina Faso right now. We'll look at how he got there.
Right.
Which is surprising in itself. The really bold, you could say, revolutionary decisions he's made.
Mm-hmm.
And especially his message. It's powerful, unfiltered, and it directly confronts a lot of, let's say, Western views about Africa and its resources.
A very direct challenge.
Definitely. So hopefully you'll get some genuine aha moments.
Yeah.
Because this story, it's kind of a shortcut to getting up to speed on a really crucial shift happening in, well, global dynamics.
Sounds good. Let's get into it.
Okay, so Ibrahim Traoré. He's definitely emerged as someone pushing back against those established global power structures.
And the first thing that jumps out is his age.
Right. Just 36. Currently the youngest head of state anywhere in the world.
But the sources stress it's not really about the number, is it? It's what he's done.
Exactly. It's the daring decisions, the far-reaching ones he's made in such a short time. That's what's marked him out as, well, for many, one of Africa's most influential and hopeful leaders.
No, it's also worth noting how he's perceived elsewhere.
Yeah. Our source points out that in the Western world, he's often seen very differently, often as a major threat.
Which really underlines why understanding his rise and the impact he's having means we first need to understand Burkina Faso itself. You know, the history there.
The context.
Absolutely. It's painful, complex history, but essential.
So where do we start with that history?
Well, the source takes us back to the colonial era. France seized control way back in 1896, made it a colony.
Right.
And after, nearly 64 years of direct rule, Burkina Faso got its formal independence in 1960.
Okay, 1960. Independence. You'd think that was the turning point.
You would think. But here's the key thing the source highlights, and it's really crucial. That independence was, well, mostly in name only.
How so?
In practice, France never really let go. Their influence, their control, it remained deeply embedded. It created this sort of indirect colonialism, neo-colonialism we call it now.
So independent on paper.
But still dependent in reality.
And what did that French control look like day to day or systemically?
Oh, it was everywhere. It gripped the country's politics, the economy, its natural resources, which are significant, and even security. It wasn't just a shadow. It was woven into the fabric of the state.
Can you give an example? Something concrete.
Yeah, the source gives a really striking one. Gold. Think about this. 80% of Burkina Faso's total exports came from its gold mines.
80%. That's huge.
Massive. But the country itself had almost no control over it. French companies ran the mines, processed the gold, sold it internationally.
So the wealth just flowed out.
Exactly. National wealth pouring out, while the people living right there above the gold, they remained incredibly poor.
And how did France maintain that grip post-independence?
Well, according to the source, mainly by backing pro-French rulers, keeping them in power, and also by maintaining a military presence, nominally for security, but
it effectively undermined their sovereignty.
Precisely. It hollowed it out.
So this cycle just continued.
Yeah, this ongoing exploitation, this injustice, it just trapped Burkina Faso. A cycle of poverty, corruption, political instability, long, long after 1960.
Wow. Okay, so you could see how that couldn't last indefinitely. People must have been getting increasingly frustrated.
Exactly. The source indicates that from the 2010s, public discontent really started simmering, then boiling over. Political instability just got worse and worse.
Right.
And this led to a key moment in January 2022. The military, led by a General Paul-Henri Damiba, staged a coup, took power.
Oh, okay, a change in leadership. Did that help?
Well, the source suggests not really. This new leader, Damiba, he ultimately didn't manage to steer the country onto a better path, didn't deliver the change people wanted.
So more frustration.
Within the military itself, actually. Growing dissatisfaction there led to another coup, just months later in September 2022.
Another one.
Yes. And this time, leadership was handed to this young captain, Ibrahim Traoré.
And that's the moment.
That's the moment the source calls a new and revolutionary chapter for Burkina Faso.
Okay, so Traoré takes power. Everyone's watching.
Yeah.
What does he do first? The source says his initial moves were shocking.
Shocking is a good word. I mean, his first major act, according to the material, was incredibly bold. January 2023, just a few months in.
What did he do?
He just canceled the defense agreement with France, flat out, and gave the French army an ultimatum. Leave the country within 1 month.
Wow. That's
Direct. Extremely direct. It wasn't just symbolic. It was a real assertion of sovereignty. And the source notes, France basically had to comply. They were forced to bow to his determination. A huge signal.
okay, so breaking from France, what else?
Then he moved quickly to diversify, looked beyond those traditional ties, started building new partnerships. Russia, China, Turkey mentioned specifically.
For what purpose?
Getting weapons, training, strengthening Burkina Faso's own national army, moving away from that old dependency.
Makes sense. Political freedom needs military autonomy too, arguably.
And economic autonomy. Traoré seems to grasp that very clearly.
How so?
He launched this campaign, quite aggressive apparently, to get national control over the gold industry. Remember that 80% figure?
Gold flowing out.
Exactly. So in 2023, he laid the groundwork for Burkina Faso's first ever gold processing refinery, actually processing their own gold.
Keeping the value in the country.
That's the idea. And he also canceled some foreign mining permits, nationalized 2 British-owned mines. Direct action to reclaim national wealth, as he saw it.
That's a clear economic sovereignty push. Any other examples?
Yes, another big one. Rejecting external debt traps, or the perception of them. In August 2024, he explicitly rejected a loan offer from the IMF, the International Monetary Fund.
Why is that significant? The IMF gives loans all the time.
It is significant because IMF loans often come with conditions, policy requirements that many developing countries feel restrict their choices and sovereignty. Rejecting it was a powerful statement. We'll manage our own affairs.
Okay, so asserting political, military, and economic independence. What about domestically, inside the country?
Yeah, he focused there too. Tackling immediate crises. The source mentions an agricultural revolution, distributing free farm equipment to boost food production, tackle the food prices head on.
Practical steps.
Very practical. And energy too. Signed deals for a solar power plant with Chinese help, and quite notably, a nuclear power plant deal with Russian cooperation.
Nuclear. Interesting.
Yeah. The source suggests these are long-term plays expected to boost infrastructure and hopefully living standards.
So a really busy first year or so. Decisive actions across the board.
Absolutely.
And this all kind of builds up to his recent speech, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The one that got so much global attention. What was the core message there?
Well, Traoré, as the source points out, has always been pretty critical of capitalism and specifically American and European policies towards Africa.
Okay.
So his speech really hit 2 main themes. One, the exploitation of Africa's resources historically and now. And 2, this whole issue of neocolonialism we touched on earlier.
And why did this speech resonate so much? What made it different?
The source describes it as more than just politics. It was like an echo of Africa's shared pain, anger, and hope. Very visceral.
How so?
Well, for starters, he directly called out major international news outlets. CNN, BBC, France 24, accused them point blank of spreading lies, distorting information about Africa.
He actually named them.
Oh, yeah. The quote is powerful. CNN, BBC, France 24, I am watching all of you. I am recording every lie you tell. I am collecting everything you distort. I am Ibrahim Traoré, and today I am unmasking you.
That's incredibly confrontational.
It is. And he didn't stop there. He talked about the images of Africa he grew up seeing on Western TV, remember? He's only 36.
What kind of images?
He described it as always the same. Children surrounded by flies, dry land, weapons, death. He argued this stuff makes Africans ashamed of their own continent, their own people.
Wow.
He accused the media of portraying Africans almost like human animals, wild animals, said their dictionary for Africa just doesn't have words like hope, success, development, resistance, dignity, pride, or victory, just ignoring all the positive things, the culture, the progress.
That's a heavy critique of media narrative.
A very heavy critique. And then he tied it back to the economic situation.
Right.
He posed this really sharp question, something like, you ask why Africa is poor, but you never ask how Africa, which is so rich, was kept poor.
Flipping the question. Not why is it poor, but why was it made poor?
Exactly. That reframing is key to his whole argument.
Did he back that up? Or was it just rhetoric?
No, he backed it up.
Yeah.
The source details the statistics he presented, really alarming figures to show what he calls unethical, unfair exploitation by Western powers.
Like what?
Okay, get this. 70% of the world's cobalt essential for our phones, laptops, EV batteries comes from the Congo. Yet, he says, most Congolese can't even afford a basic mobile phone.
That's a stark contrast.
Isn't it? He also mentioned 90% of platinum from South Africa, but the communities there face extreme poverty and unemployment. 30% of gold from places like Mali, Burkina Faso itself, Ghana, Tanzania, but the wealth flows out, the people stay poor.
It paints a picture.
A very clear one. 65% of diamonds from Botswana, Angola, Congo, Sierra Leone. Billions of dollars worth, but workers making less than $1 a day. And maybe the most striking, 35% of the uranium powering European cities like Paris comes from Niger, Namibia, South Africa.
Let me guess.
But the African villages where it's mined often have no electricity themselves.
Right. That really lands the point.
So his core message, pulled from all this, is blunt. Africa is not poor, rather it has been impoverished.
Impoverished.
Yeah.
Actively made poor.
Yes. He blames the legacy of colonialism and its modern forms neocolonialism, which he argues stop African countries having full control over their own stuff, their resources.
How does he say that happens now? Without direct rule?
Through things like unfair agreements, debt traps, economic pressure. He argues Western powers basically seize the minerals this way, stopping African people benefiting from their own wealth, keeping that poverty cycle going.
And he had a quote about that too, right? About how colonialism changed form.
He did. It's very pointed. First, you occupied our countries. Now you open companies. First, you took by force. Now you make agreements. First, you ruled with whips. Now you compel with debt.
That draws a direct line from the past to the present.
A very direct line. He's essentially saying the fundamental relationship hasn't changed, just the methods.
So from his perspective, aid isn't the answer.
No, he explicitly says Africa's problem isn't a life of aid, it's interference. That's the word he uses. Interference that stops Africa becoming self-reliant.
How does interference work, in his view?
Through those debt traps, unequal trade deals, exploitation by big multinational corporations. He argues these things attack Africa's economic and political freedom, keeping countries in a developing state deliberately so the West can keep control of the resources.
It's a strong accusation that the developing status is maintained on purpose.
A very strong accusation. And it links back to his media critique, too.
Right, the point about not showing success stories.
Exactly. He challenged the big names again, New York Times, Washington Post, Guardian, Le Monde. Asked them, how often do you show Ethiopia's big reconstruction projects?
Yeah.
Or Botswana's democratic success? Or Kenya's entrepreneurship?
Because those stories don't fit the narrative.
That's his argument. They don't fit their script. In their Africa story, Africa can't succeed on its own. Because, he asks, if Africa doesn't need help, how can the West interfere? If Africans aren't backward, how can they be belittled or patronized?
So the media bias, in his view, serves a purpose.
It serves to justify continued intervention and influence, yeah. That's the connection he makes. A successful, self-reliant Africa reduces the need for Western aid and the influence that comes with it.
Okay, so pulling this all together, Traoré's message seems crystal clear.
Incredibly clear. Africa doesn't want to be a puppet anymore. That's the gist. He's calling for self-reliance, dignity, freedom for African nations to choose their own path.
And how is that message being received within Africa?
According to the source, it's ignited real hope, a new consciousness, especially among young people across the continent. It's fueling a kind of Pan-Africanist sentiment.
Pan-Africanism, meaning?
Meaning African countries working together, prioritizing their own collective interests, their sovereignty, pushing back against external control as a unified bloc, or at least with shared purpose.
So this isn't just about Burkina Faso.
Not at all. If you zoom out, Traoré's rise, his rhetoric, it seems to signal a broader shift, a new polarization maybe, where developing nations are getting much more vocal, much more assertive about their rights.
And we see that playing out geopolitically.
Well, look at Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, all moving away from that traditional French sphere of influence and strengthening ties with Russia, China, others for security, for economic deals. That looks like a real trend, a potential shift in the power balance in Africa.
So Traoré's challenge, it's really put a spotlight on Africa's potential, but also its ongoing struggles.
Definitely. His voice is amplifying this demand for self-determination, for self-reliance. It feels like it represents not just his country, but a feeling across the continent, a desire to finally write their own story.
We've covered a lot there, a deep dive into Ibrahim Traoré, Burkina Faso, this history of exploitation, and a really powerful modern challenge to how things have been.
Yeah, it really underscores this global push for self-determination, for economic sovereignty. It's happening in many places.
And what's truly striking, I think, is how one individual's voice can seem to capture that collective feeling of a whole continent.
Absolutely. And challenge perceptions that have been dominant for so long. It forces us, or should force us, to rethink how global power really works.
So for you, the listener, maybe something to chew on as you go about your day is this. Think about the narratives we consume all the time.
Yeah.
News, media, history books. How do they shape our understanding of the world? Especially places that are incredibly rich in resources but are constantly framed as just poor.
What stories aren't we hearing?
Exactly. What are we missing when only one main perspective gets amplified? And, what could actually happen if more voices like Traoré's were heard directly, unfiltered? Something to think about.